Well, hello, everyone. On behalf of all my colleagues at Pariveda across the US and Canada, welcome to another episode of our peer learning series, Architecting the Future of Healthcare. For those that are just starting to join us, we will get started shortly. You can see that we have folks joining us. For those that are just joining us, we will be starting in about a minute or so. Okay. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of our peer learning series, Architecting the Future of Healthcare. My name is Stephanie David, and I am pleased to be hosting today's discussion. And as a vice president at Pariveda, I get to inspire and empower not only our clients, but our people to embrace, adopt, and accelerate at times digital strategies, but also implement those digital technologies and solutions to deliver extraordinary outcomes. And one of the most rewarding things that I get to see in my job and doing what I love is watching how our clients go through the process of defining their vision, their strategy, how their vision comes to life, and ultimately through implementation, how they get to realize the value expected, whether it is financial business value or simply getting closer to enable those therapies and services needed to address the unmet medical needs of our communities. And we'll be talking a little bit about these topics today. So as we dive deeper into why we believe we're witnessing the beginning of a new era in life sciences, where some of the most forward-thinking organizations are creating momentum by experimenting with new innovations powered by digital emerging technologies to deliver the next generation of patient care, digitizing the healthcare experience, and in doing so, reshaping the industry. I am joined today by four fantastic people, friends of mine: Gavin Erickson from Viva Systems, Nandan Shah from ASI North America, Paul Gauthier from Takeda, and Vincent Dunne from the Wastel Group. And what I'd like to do next is to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves and the organizations and roles they're currently in, as well as sharing with you all one impactful learning they've had this past year that has forced them to rethink the way that they show up today and the way that they operate in today's world. So with that, Gavin, why don't you, let's start with you. Let's have you introduce yourself.
Sure. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. My name is Gavin Erickson. I'm a global account manager at Viva Systems. My entire career has been in healthcare and life sciences, so going on about 25 years, where I've spanned roles across payer, industry, consulting, and then the obvious next step of software. So in my role, I look after the commercial book of business for one of Viva's top customers. What we're trying to do with the GAM role is be much more consultative in our approach to those customers, really marrying up the commercial imperatives that they're trying to solve for and making sure that our product roadmap is reflective of where our customers are trying to take their business. So again, be more consultative, bring broader industry experience to bear on those relationships, right? Just, we're no longer just a software sales organization. So I would say that the key takeaway for me, and I think, it's kind of a, like a no duh takeaway, but I think what we've seen is that the digital world in life sciences, is not changing. The digital world in life sciences has changed, right? There's no going back to what it was before the pandemic. And I think, how industry and how manufacturers respond to that is really going to determine their success in the future.
Awesome. Thank you. Nandan, why don't you go next? And you're mute. You're on mute, Nandan.
Sorry. My name is Nandan Shah. I'm the Senior Director for R&D IT at ASI. I've been in the life sciences industry for 25 years, mainly in the R&D IT space. My remit here at ASI is to provide innovative and leading edge solutions to enable our neurology and oncology business. The one impactful thing that is a lesson that I've learned from the past 1 year is I think it's that it's time to get back to the basics and to find some kind of a fulfillment from that. So just recently, towards that end, I bought myself a piano so that I can learn to play music. So just one of those things where we just, each one of us needs to find some small inspiration to just keep, find some fulfillment.
I'm there with you. Paul, why don't you go next?
Great. Thank you, Stephanie. That's great to hear, Nandan, the piano, and going back to the simpler things I think is definitely key. So hi, everyone. Paul Gauthier. I lead the biologics business excellence function within global manufacturing and supply at Takeda. Not to go into a lot of details, but my team is really designed to assist in running the business as biologics being a business within the broader business. So everything you can imagine that goes in there. And I like to term us as catalyzers. What we're really put in place to do is catalyze outcomes. And I know that's very general. And we can go into specific areas, transformation, innovation, investments, strategy as far as where we manufacture in our network. But in particular, I'll highlight here one of the core responsibilities of the team is around data and digital strategy. And that's leading the strategy through to execution for the biologics business. And this is an interesting question, Stephanie, about reflecting on last year and learnings or whatever it might be. And for me, it was, when I think of last year, I'm reminded really of the importance of human connections and of community, and really how critically important it is to nurture that in this virtual world. Because it's no longer as easy as it was before. Organically, you're in the office, you run into people in the hallway, you grab a coffee, and you have the connectivity while you're also transacting business. But in this world, I think it's really critically important and requires intentional effort. And I put the intentional in there because I don't know about anyone else, but for me, reflecting on last year, I didn't necessarily have that intention and prioritization to really keep those connections that fuel my engine versus always transacting business, which tends to deplete. So for me, if there's one takeaway from what I learned last year and what I can really influence within my sphere of influence is driving more of that connectivity and community.
Thank you, Paul. Well said, and thank you for the personal transparency. Vincent, why don't you go next?
Sure, thank you, Stephanie. Pleased to meet everybody. So my name is Vincent Dunne. I've spent 25 years of my career in life sciences. Most recently, I moved into a CDMO or contract manufacturer and packer. So we're the actual people that sometimes pharma companies would outsource to. So 10 years ago, if you had a looked at our organization, we would have been doing very basic activities. Now that service offering, and particularly in the past year, has broadened because we add on a lot of bolt-on services, including managing people's supply chain, their quality systems, etc. And more so, we've started realizing we're managing a lot of people's data too. So the one learning, I think I'll be provocative and have a little bit of a poke at Paul. We often talk about getting systems or processes and people in balance, and otherwise we won't advance. I think if you look at the rate of pace in the past year on digitalization, I think it's a reminder that we humans are the bottleneck. We humans hold it back. The technology is there. And I think we've got to understand, okay, well, if we were to accelerate so much in the past 12 months because of the restrictions and because we were forced to do so, why can't we do that without restrictions? Why can't we do so with, on our own free will and even be more productive? So I think we've got to almost just ignore that thing of balancing people, process, and technology and say we got to let technology lead the way and adopt to that quicker.
Great. I am actually super excited to see what the discussion will unveil. So before we dive into open it up to the panelists in the questions, a couple of logistical details that I'd like to share. The first one being a recorded version of this webinar will be available upon conclusion of this episode for those that did register. And as it relates to the questions that the audience might have to our guest speakers today, we'd love to hear from you. Feel free to submit questions via the Q&A portal in the Zoom window, and we will try to answer them during the Q&A. So to introduce our topic today, why are we saying a new era for life sciences has begun? As an industry sector that is so critical to the human health, as an industry sector that is subjected to the regulatory requirements imposed by the global health authorities, and complemented or given the global impacts of the pandemic across all of the sectors in the business community, and how it has introduced changes to everyday life in a scale that we haven't seen in generations, we have been able to see how the life sciences sector has actually risen to the challenge, as Vincent said, because let's face it, I don't think we had any other option. So as Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella puts it, we have seen, and I'm paraphrasing, we have seen about 2 years worth of digital transformation in about 2 months. So let me put this quote into context. Almost overnight, life sciences organizations had to quickly mobilize and transform their ways of working to address 2 fundamental challenges, in my opinion. The first one is the ability to accelerate the complex discovery and development process, which, as we all know, normally can take between 8 to 10 years. Very expensive process from an R&D investment perspective. Doing that without sacrificing the patient safety, and at the same time, prepare the infrastructure for large-scale rapid production of vaccines, as well as treatments to support the global health crisis. Secondly, life sciences organizations need to continue to deliver existing and new innovative therapies to the healthcare system. Just because we're in a pandemic doesn't mean that diabetes goes away. So even as R&D organizations, manufacturing, supply chain, commercial are struggling to maintain business as usual, relying on sometimes outdated legacy infrastructures and system, these challenges are every day for the people that are living and breathing in the life sciences domain. So as we continue to witness how life sciences organizations embrace new science trends and new emerging technologies, it is important to understand why we are where we are today. So with that, I'd like to perhaps open it up to the panelists today. And in doing that, I would like them to provide their perspectives of what they're seeing, what they're sensing from the industry today. So Vincent, I'd like to start the dialogue with you. And perhaps the first question that I'd like to ask you is, in your role as CEO, given what we have seen in the industry today, and as you are accountable for not only ensuring the safety and the well-being of your employees, but also the performance and survival of your company, how do you lead an organization through what the world is facing right now? And perhaps how has the pandemic affected your business and your organization's ability to accelerate the shift to digital, if at all there's been an acceleration in your organization?
Sure, and it seems it's bizarre that we're less than a year into this, but 11 months ago or whatever, when this all broke, we were in survival mode at the start, because being a CDMO, operations had to continue. We couldn't remote work. We had to have people on the production lines, on the packing lines, in the warehouse doing our pick and pack, etc. So it was really crisis management. We had to galvanize the workforce. We had to manage new supply chains, because you have to remember that with the lack of commercial flights, etc., the whole supply chain for pharma was completely disrupted overnight. And then we had to do the basics. We had to find PPE for our staff, etc., but also for local community hospitals that were crying out for support. And then from that, we then started to adapt to different ways of working, because pharma, when they outsource, typically can be very needy. They require people and plants, etc., in order to support launches, ongoing activities. So we had to find new ways to deal with those and facilitate those customers. Even from a regulatory point of view, we couldn't have audits the way we typically would from regulatory bodies such as the FDA. So all of that had to go to remote working, remote Zooms, Teams, etc. And thankfully, people were able to adopt very quickly using the new technology. We've also seen an exponential growth in our business to consumer, as well as our business to business sectors, because naturally, people are looking for more stuff to be delivered, ordering online, etc. And we've adopted, probably in Q2 of last year, we adopted some of our business to consumer processes into support our clinical trials division. So we were able to continue with a lot of trials that typically would have been stopped. Now, we had to work very closely with the regulators. And again, we had to show that the data, our data was secure, that we were compliant, etc. So it led to quite a significant shift in a number of our divisions.
And in your opinion, how has any of the digital forces, digital activities, initiatives may have helped?
Yeah, I think we had the platforms in place that we could securely link in with our customers already. We were already exchanging some information on a mainly transactional type data. So we're able to leverage those platforms to share data that we hadn't considered sharing in the past.
Thank you for sharing. Nandan, why don't we go with you next in your role as an R&D senior executive leader in your organization, where the focus is on discovery and development and clinical research in the space of neurology and oncology. How might the current market conditions have accelerated the approach towards digital? And especially, when we think about and when we're talking about an industry that is typically lagging or slow to change.
Yeah, Stephanie. So thank you for the question. So maybe I'll first start off with just provide my definition of digital, which is a new way of living and working, using technology. That's how I see digital. And it is overall seeing a new uptick due to COVID-19, including healthcare and drug development. Even in economies where there was no adoption of digital before the pandemic. So this increasing acceptance to change, has come from patients, from physicians, from sponsors, and health authorities. So, for example, telemedicine has taken off and as a reliable solution, and it has reduced the burden on the patient and the caregiving staff. So that's just one example of accepting this change at a much faster, accelerated pace because of the pandemic. And so what traditionally that used to be or has, it still is in a lot of cases, a human to human interaction, is now evolving into a human to machine interaction. everything from understanding the symptom to managing the condition. So I believe this trend will continue, and not so much because of the pandemic, but more because I think we, as a society, we've all accepted that this new change or this new way of working actually works. And I do feel so that the industry will continue to innovate in this space.
Cool. Let me ask you a follow-up question to that. So in your opinion, what do you think is the industry doing to further accelerate innovation from an R&D standpoint? We always, we tend to hear that R&D organizations are becoming more data-driven and agile drug development and clinical research enterprises. What do you have to say about that?
So from my perspective, first of all, we are already witnessing an acceleration. We've all witnessed an acceleration in clinical research and drug development in vaccines and therapies, for COVID-19. So that acceleration is there in front of us. This was partly because of the circumstances. I think you mentioned that before, but also because maybe also could be because partly due to innovations and investments maybe in capabilities that were already in place before the pandemic, so which helped in this acceleration. And so this innovation cycle needs to continue, and and from everything from drug discovery to clinical development, manufacturing, the supply chain. I mean, all gamuts of this overall process. Behind the scenes, I think there are, or I would not say so much behind the scenes, but I think there are still further ways to accelerate, innovation that's already happening in this industry. And that is mainly because more and more data is becoming electronic. And so, by means of that, because the data is electronic, organizations, will or have started to come up with strategies on acquiring data, on governing data, on curating data. And I think that strategy will provide a further impetus, further acceleration in the drug discovery and in the drug development process.
Great, thank you for sharing that. What do you think, in your opinion, are some of the key capabilities that, from an R&D perspective, again, organizations need to develop to not only implement a digital strategy, but to scale it? And if you can add to that some of, what do you think are some of the limitations and challenges, that would be awesome.
Yeah, so maybe I'll talk a little bit about the challenges first. I think there's a lot of innovation happening, and which is great, but also which is a challenge to some extent. And so there are a lot of providers, there are a lot of digital providers, and it's tough to pinpoint and try to connect all the dots across all the different providers. And so coming up with a strategy is not as easy as it seems. So it's a double-edged sword to some extent, because the innovation engine needs to keep running. But then because it is running and providing new solutions to the industry, it is kind of creating too many choices, I guess, or too many ways to go about it. So I think that's the challenge that, and it's not unsurmountable challenge, but it is, I think, I do feel it is a challenge, which will continue to be there in front of us. I think in the other question, which is the key capabilities to go from, I guess, from piloting, from running different pilots to go to scale. For me, the number one capability is to make the organization digital savvy, and making the people, or making them, or enabling them, or supporting them to become digital savvy. I think there's a strong component of organizational change, also refining processes and work practices. It's in some cases what we are seeing is it starts at the top in the organization, From my perspective, it's not something that's very, I guess, easy to measure. It's not very tangible as such, but it is a change that it starts with the people and their way of becoming more comfortable in a digital workplace, just like they are maybe at home, but also to be able to be savvy in terms of managing data or handling data, or playing around with data, and a lot of data nowadays because it's all electronic. So I think there is this capable to go from doing pilots to go to scale. I think changing the organization, retooling, reskilling the workforce, I think is got to be the key thing, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I also would add that, that in itself introduces a number of challenges to also teach different parts of the organization, especially from a quality and regulatory perspective, how to handle, that massive intake of data. And then from a data security perspective, how do you teach the organization on the processes and the procedures to follow to secure the data?
Yeah.
Paul, I'm going to go to you next. From a biologics perspective, at Takeda, what do you think, given the role that you play, the current market conditions have accelerated the approach towards digital?
Yeah, so I guess I'll speak more broadly, Stephanie, than just within Takeda, and open it up to what I've seen and folks I've talked to. Really, a few things jump to my mind. And the first that's absolutely top of mind now, and hopefully top of mind for everyone, is risk. And I think what we experienced last year is painfully experienced, I'll say, to emphasize it, is we certainly live in a VUCA world. The volatility, the uncertainty, the complexity, the ambiguity. I mean, I'd be hard pressed to find anyone that would disagree. And for me, that really highlighted that, we've talked about risk for quite a while. It's in, quality, compliance, business continuity, crisis management, et cetera. But I don't know that we ever really gave it proper, focus with what we experienced the last year. And I think we all went through and said, geez, if we had seen this coming, maybe we would have done things differently. So I really emphasize risk management. It's internal to Takeda. I think it's across industries, let alone just life sciences. And it's critical to look at it. And I'll say from an enterprise perspective, really looking holistically, internally, what are your processes, your vulnerabilities, your materials, externally, who are the partners and suppliers you rely on, people. I think we're learning now that we even have vulnerability where with COVID, there's people in the workforce where we're losing a significant percentage, especially first half of last year, where we had to continue operations with a fraction of the staff. And I don't think that's anything we could have really planned for. So part of that is really, I think, with risk management, looking at holistically the value stream, highlighting really where are your weak points and being honest, where your weak points are, where do you have contingencies or mitigations? And then there's absolutely opportunity to leverage digital to reduce risk and better understand the business. So for me, that's key. Data is another area that we've already talked about, and it's going to be a theme now, and I'm certain it's going to be a bigger theme going into the future. And it's not just data, because we always generate a lot of data. Our machines generate data, our personnel generate data, et cetera. But do we consolidate it well? Do we really use the data? Do we have it available to us, especially when things happen and it's uncertain, or all of a sudden our lives change? Do we have the data to really understand what's the impact? What are our levers that we can pull to re-navigate and calibrate around these challenges? It's hugely important. And I think there's got to be more and more focus on data and discovering, really what are those opportunities to consolidate, to leverage, and realize that, maybe the manual systems and the disconnected systems worked in the past and we heavily relied on people, but that's not going to work in this type of environment. And it's certainly not going to help you, do well and be robust going into the future. And the last point that I'll highlight for here, and I think Nandan was speaking my language when he started talking about start with the people and talked a bit about education. And I interpreted that as digital literacy at the highest level. Right. So for me, the third point I want to highlight is skills. And it's not just skills. Do you have the SMEs that have the technical know-how? Do you have the data scientists, et cetera? It's, do you have the literacy from the executive level down to the shop floor, down to the people that are doing transactions, managing, you know, unexpected events? And for me, that's critically important. And again, it's everywhere. And I think we're getting to a point, and not to quote Brene Brown, but we do have to get a little bit more comfortable with vulnerability at every level, especially the executive and the leadership level. And I'll highlight one area that I think is a key point for vulnerability here is being comfortable not knowing everything around digital and data and relying on this extremely, extremely talented and knowledgeable and tech savvy workforce that's very early in their career, that maybe in the past they would be in the back room doing the work. They would never interact with a leadership level or an executive. Mm-hmm. I think where we are today and where we have to go is there's no boundaries like this. The CEOs and the C-suite and the leaders are talking to the data scientists and the technical savvy folks that are 1 or 2 years out of university. And I've even heard this term lately that I think is gaining momentum around, you know, they call it reverse mentorship, or even in some cases mutual mentorship. And I think that's getting a lot of traction. And just for the clarity, what that means is leadership that feel like, hey, I got it all figured out. I got to this point in my career, like I'm on top of the world, have to be okay and be vulnerable and say, geez, some of these students that just out of university, I need them to mentor me and educate me. So for me, that's a really, really big area, and it's going to be uncomfortable. And I've been thinking in my head how to term this well, and I think it's everyone needs to get comfortable with discomfort. Yep. Like be okay, be vulnerable. Don't try to feel like you need to know everything. And it's okay if someone's half your age and has, you know, a fraction of your tenure in the industry, they can still educate you. And I think that that's the kind of environment that's being created now, and we need to make sure that we reinforce.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and definitely gotta love Brene for sure. So in your opinion, Paul, just to follow up to some of the points that you highlighted, what do you think the industry is doing to further accelerate digital innovation from a supply chain and manufacturing perspective?
Yeah, so I think there are a number of areas to accelerate the adoption of the digital capabilities and really focus on creating intelligent, resilient, data-informed processes. And I think you can't go wrong, and I feel like I'll be a broken record today. Education, you can't go wrong. Like it's a first step, and education could be as simple of awareness, knowledge to actually being able to apply skills. So I think that's always going to be a good starting point. If people don't understand what you're trying to go after and how you're going after it, how can you ever garner their kind of, you know, their passion and their excitement about it? You really can't. So you have to start with basics. And Nandan mentioned this earlier. Go back to the basics. Data, again, a theme. Investing in data just to harmonize it, to have it accessible, to really think about, and, you know, as simple as view is like, how do you get it together? What's that, you know, backbone, and what's the platform that you create to bring data together from disparate sources, whether it's structured, it's unstructured. But the point is you need to get it together to have the consolidated view that you can tap into, then start being creative with advanced analytics, really understanding how the data connects and what's the story that's hidden in there that you'll never discover if it's, you know, in different sources. And a few points that just came to my mind on data is really, and I know everyone in this call must appreciate this, we really, really, really need to prioritize getting away from the sea of spreadsheets. I can't tell you internally, externally, people I talk to, like, oh yeah, I got all that data. And then it turns out they have 35 spreadsheets that to create a report every month, they have to cut and paste and transcribe, and very manual. And that for me makes me shudder, especially with my quality background, and saying, there's definitely not integrity in that data. And there's a high probability something's going to change in the process. And then you have to think, we're making business decisions on the analyses that are based on the data. So if that's how the data is created for a report, how confident can you be in you know, the decisions that you're making? So data, hugely important. We need to get away from spreadsheets as quickly as possible. We have to think about how to connect the equipment, whether it's anything in the sea of opportunities with IoT. We have tremendous amount of equipment, testing equipment, instrumentation, sensors, data. And if they're all disconnected and we can't capture the data in a harmonized way to really make sense of it, it doesn't add any value. And it actually, I feel like in a lot of cases is an extreme vulnerability because you don't know what's lurking, right, in that data because it's hidden. A couple other points, one, building on data is really thinking about once you have that infrastructure, you harmonize the data, you have it in the same place that you need it, everyone has access to it. So transparency, I think, is a really significant shift in mentality where knowledge used to be power, you keep it close to your chest. I think knowledge now is power, but it's only powerful when you open it up. So having it open source to the organization. And the visualization piece is really key. So once you have all the data, then you have to say, like, how do we actually get any use out of it? And not even going into the advanced data analytics and all that cool stuff you can do with AI and machine learning, but simplifying, like, we need to have an ability to visually see the current view. Where are we today? How are we performing today? And then you have to then have the ability to tap into and say, okay, well, what's it look like? How we've been performing in the past? So we know today, we look back at the past, how are we trending? Like, is it better or worse? Are we flatlined, whatever? And I think really quickly, we're gonna have the ability to start being more predictive and using these tools to visualize not only where you've been and where you are, but where you're going, and have a higher degree of certainty where you can project out, how are you going to land with your financials? How are you going to land with your supply inventory position at the end of the year? And I think we're going to get there. It's going to take time, but on data, I feel like there's those pieces where it's creating it, visualizing it. And then just to sum up very quickly, Stephanie, I know I've been sharing a lot of my thoughts and I could go on forever in this space, is just thinking about digital. It's really understanding it's a journey. You're not going to jump and get there. There's no real end. So your journey is going to be whatever it is particular to your industry or your organization or the size or the needs, but it's going to be in digital. And then you're going to continue to have new challenges and opportunities over time. It's always going to be perpetual. So never say, oh, if we just do this for 5 years and get in a place where we can sit back and relax, because then in 5 years, you're going to be then that far behind and you're going to have to restart. So it's something you have to continue to fuel. All organizations, like I mentioned, benefit from it, small or large. And the one quick case study example I'll share is Moderna, because it's relevant to all of us. Everyone has seen in the news, and depending on how much you've dug into the organization, if you haven't, please look into it because it's amazing. Like Moderna is one of those examples where you say, small organization, startup, relatively new. I think they were founded in 2010. And they actually proactively and intentionally built their organization on digital, on data, on cloud. They said, hey, this is where we want to go. We don't want to put processes in place to then have to go and rework them. And I can say, like, you look into it, it's an amazing example. And I don't know if they've gotten as much press on that infrastructure and thoughtfulness and the design of the organization as much as it's, hey, they're really quick to turn around the vaccine with this new technology, mRNA. It's amazing. But I think if you dig under the surface, you see that they basically set themselves up really well without knowing this was coming with COVID to turn on a dime, to create a vaccine and get it through to the clinic in an amazing time. I forgot what the quote was, like from the time they agreed to do it to the time they had phase 1 material was something like 2 months. And I think that compares to a typical timeline of like 20 months. So just to put in perspective, and if that's what we can achieve as organizations by being proactive and building some elements of digital, knowing that you can move towards something more sophisticated in the future and have these possibilities open during a pandemic, like, I don't know, for me, it totally sold me on, hey, it's worth the investment and the effort up front versus trying to retool antiquated processes that are not done well later on.
Yeah, definitely.
The very last thing I just want to say is always plan for challenges. Know they're going to come and don't get discouraged.
Thanks, Paul. I would have to completely agree on the Moderna case. This is one of those things where, as I've seen in the past, it's not about taking your legacy infrastructure, business models, what have you, or bring digital to that, you actually have to create your organization, your business model by taking it to cyberspace, by taking it to the digital world. All right, before I move on to Gavin, I have one last question, and keep it to a minute, please. And that is, in your opinion, key capabilities that need to be in place, and what are some of the limitations and challenges that you would expect to see?
Okay, I'm really passionate about this topic, as you can tell, Stephanie, and especially in this space. I'll do my very best because I want to be mindful of other people's opportunity to speak. So the one thing I'll just say, I highly recommend taking a future back approach to establishing what the organization could be when you're thinking about digital vision in particular. And if you're not familiar with the term, highly recommend you look into it. But think of Jeff Bezos, think of Elon Musk. They didn't do a forward-looking approach because they would have been limited by what they had in front of them today. They did a, what can we do? Let's look at the future, decide on where we want to go and what we could be and what's possible, and then figure out the details. How do we get there? And then you build a plan. So in real short fashion, I'll say to achieve that type of approach, you want to clearly define where you want to go, why you want to get there, like what's your purpose, define how you plan to do that, ways of working, governance, etc. What does that really entail? So what is it that you're going to do? What are the outcomes and the results you want to see and expect? And then once you answer those questions, always create a roadmap and make it excruciatingly simple that anyone in your organization can understand, and make sure everyone knows it, understands it, and understands how they support it, because that's going to be your roadmap to deliver on your vision. And I'll mention this one last time really quickly. People, focus and look at the culture, develop the culture, spend the time there, and think about your customers, because the customers are the beginning and the end of everything. I would say foster a courageous learning environment built on psychological safety. Invest in building capabilities everywhere in the org. And one thing I'll highlight that I've appreciated more the last year is experimentation. Truly important. In those two topics I just shared, I think Leslie's going to drop a couple of books that I highly recommend folks read in the chat if you have time. I'm sure you can find some time to take a look. And I emphasize customer because, again, isn't the customer the reason why all of our organizations exist? Everyone has customers. If we didn't, we wouldn't exist and we wouldn't be talking about it today. And lastly, but always think about how you communicate and be transparent and really, really highlight the accomplishments. Like, you want to build the excitement because there's so many people in your organizations and they're all extremely passionate. All you have to do is tap that passion and it's amazing what you can achieve.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. Gavin, let's shift into the commercial world, sales and marketing. So in your role as a global accounts manager at Veeva, supporting life sciences organizations, what do you think, how the current market conditions accelerated the approach to digital in the commercial space?
Yep. Yeah, and Paul mentioned customers, so a good segue over to the commercial guys. Paul, you also mentioned 35 spreadsheets, and I've done a lot of consulting, and that might be the nirvana state for some of my old clients. But anyway, so I mentioned earlier that digital is here to stay, and we've seen, just this massive shift in the last 12 months. So I think what we've seen is that, digital was something that companies dabbled with, but the pandemic really changed physical access and rep mobility overnight. And as Stephanie said, the industry really was forced to adjust. So I have a few stats here that I'd like to share. In the last 12 months, we've seen a massive shift in how HCPs communicate with industry and vice versa. So as physical access decreases, other channels, we're seeing kind of a hockey stick effect. So we have a product called Pulse at Veeva, where we look at digital engagement across the industry. So over those last 12 months, we've seen over a 400% increase in HCP emails. So those are emails from industry to healthcare providers. No surprise to anyone, we've seen a 73% reduction in physical events. I'm actually surprised it's not higher than that, but again, physical access being down, we've now seen almost a 700% increase in engaged meetings with an average of 19 minutes duration. So Engage is Viva's digital platform, and roughly we have about 1 million downloads of the Engage meeting app with HCPs, admins, staff, et cetera. So just kind of a massive shift of how industry interacts with HCPs and vice versa. So I think what we've seen is that HCPs are redefining not only how they want to be communicated with, but I think more importantly, when. And it's our perspective that these changes are here to stay at some level. So we know at some point when mass vaccinations happen, there's going to be physical access that's opened up. But I think one of the lingering results, at least in the life sciences space, is I think physicians have realized that, they might want to be more protective of their time. Maybe they only have to go to the office for 3 days or go to the hospital for 3 days, and they can accomplish the other things at home, whether it be admin or other things. So you mentioned digital strategy, and I really like some of the comments that we heard, because it was kind of a blend of kind of buzzwords like artificial intelligence, machine learning, things like that. But I really want to focus on the future back approach that Paul talked about. I think in a rush to become more digital, in a rush to put data and insights in the middle or in the center of a discussion, we've seen some customers just try to solve everything and just try to, maybe build something overly complex when in reality, what you need is fairly simple. So, we're not a Google, we're not an Amazon, we're not creating algorithms based on search history that are going to, populate ads in a millisecond. What we're trying to do in the commercial space is look at maybe your access position, look at how physicians respond to different channels, how they like to be communicated with, and then manipulating a bit how you send those reps to market, right? So maybe it's more of a digital approach. Maybe it's more of an email or different things like that. So essentially, start with, the future back, right? So start with the business problem you're trying to solve and kind of dumb it down and then build those insights and the analytic functions that you need to solve those questions.
Awesome. And a follow-up question that's coming in, Gavin, what do you think, how do you help commercial organizations and life sciences think and act to leverage the power of data and analytics to enable more of a patient-centric commercial organizations? And then I think there's a follow-up to that, which is, what are the top 3 things that successful commercial organizations have done right when it comes to transforming the patient experience?
Yep, great question. So I would say, starting with the patient experience, we're seeing such an evolution with digital and how we engage with patients, right? So you can start with clinical research. So there's paperless clinical trials right now that eliminate a lot of the administrative burden. So for a product like that, the patient can instant message HCPs. They can do a lot of these things virtually, whereas, in the past, they would have to physically go back to the site to maybe report their symptoms, get a checkup or things like that. So I think quite simply, it's putting the patient at the center. And again, there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach, but I think you need to look at what product you're talking about, at least from the commercial perspective. So do you have a product that's being prescribed by primary care? Well, if so, that patient journey, that patient support is going to be vastly different than something in the rare disease space, where diagnosing patients might be a challenge because you're dealing with, maybe 2,000 patients in the country that have a certain disease. So I think, really looking at, what digital enablers can meet those patients where they are on that treatment and diagnostic continuum. So for example, it might be wearables, it might be, other medication monitoring tools, right? So we look at, if you take diabetes, if you looked at diabetes 20 years ago and you said, well, in the future, you could have a bloodless CGM, you could have connected pens, you could have a way for physicians to, interact with their HCP and their nursing team. It's pretty wild how digital and technology has changed a lot of these chronic diseases. So I would say, look at where your product is, look at what the patient problems you're trying to solve and kind of tailor your strategy around that. I think the last question was around kind of top 3 things. I'll be quick on this one. I'll boil it down to maybe one, and I would say, be open to change. Vincent talked earlier about, humans being the bottleneck. And I would say, when you look at capabilities for a commercial organization, ultimately it's delivered by people, right? There's people either emailing or detailing, whether it's in person or digitally, but you have to be open to change. So we know that, the post-pandemic world is going to be different. But we know that telemedicine is here to stay. We know digital physician detailing is here to stay. We know patients traveling less to HCPs or care sites is here to stay. So I think when you're looking at, how to best go to market, kind of boiling it down to those basics of, what problem we're trying to solve and maybe what new insights we have to look at to make those decisions is super important. And I love the, new people to the industry bringing creative thoughts. And I think that's important here, right? So, you may not need a team of 20 data scientists and statisticians, but figure out what you need to solve, and then, develop a business case around that. And the capabilities they need to develop will kind of stem from that.
Awesome. Well said. So I have a couple of questions that have come in from the audience. I'm going to start teeing them off to our panelists. That's the first question that's coming in. Probably it might benefit from Gavin or Nandan providing some perspective. The question reads something to the effect of, are we going to see a bit more collaboration within the life sciences space? And trying to bridge the gap in skills like machine learning to aid R&D and commercial. So maybe Nandan, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I think collaboration has already been going on for many years in this industry. This industry thrives on collaboration. I think transitioning to the cloud has not only again accelerated the collaboration, but also the exchange of data and the exchange of ideas. So this is not a this is something that's just going to continue to evolve and mature as time progresses. With respect to the analysis, with respect to specifically your question was about skills like machine learning, advanced analytics, and then so on and so forth. I think that's another area where collaboration is going to continue, whether it is, again, because the data is now being made available to a broader ecosystem as such, wherever the expertise lies, that that will, to move the needle forward, I think that will it's just a natural evolution. So yes, to answer your question, I would say absolutely, we will continue to see a lot more collaboration, given the fact that the data is now a lot more accessible to a broader ecosystem.
Yep. Gavin, anything to add from a commercial standpoint?
Yeah, real quickly, I'll kind of bridge the divide here between clinical and commercial, but yeah, I think the clinical development cloud has really changed that. And to Nandan's point, I think a lot of people were shocked that a vaccine, for COVID-19 was developed so quickly. But I think if you look at information being available in real time and sharing and really just focus and collaboration, it's amazing what we can accomplish. So I think we are seeing more collaboration, and I think the collaboration can be pan-industry or even within an organization, just linking better your physicians, your trials, and your patients. That kind of enhanced collaboration is just going to increase development in the future as well.
Super. I have another question is actually coming in from, this is a fun question. So Nandan, this is for you.
Okay.
What have you learned, or have you learned anything from the piano that you can apply to your role?
Never give up. I guess that'll be the first thing. Make fun out of it. Make as much out of it. The key thing is to keep trying. Since I am a new learner, and maybe also something I've believed in, that perfection is a sort of a myth. So just, have fun at it and just keep going at it. I think it's reiterated some of my beliefs. So yeah.
Awesome. Vincent, there's a question coming in for you. And it's around skills, and it says, or it reads, a major challenge, at least in healthcare, is that the culture resists change. How do you deal with that? How are your organizations addressing culture bottleneck in adopting digital?
I think that's a challenge in most organizations. We've all seen it as we put in projects. I think we're going to, as I said earlier on, we need to be much more tolerant of adapting quicker. I really think that in the future, you're going to see that the technology and change itself will overtake organizations. And I say that because if you look at what's going on in the industry with Amazon, Microsoft, Google, etc., entering into the pharma space, you know, you got to believe that in a few years' time, they're going to be major players. So I think there's a major disruption coming. And I think the technologies that those guys, even Viva, etc., that are laying down there, I think you're going to see that IT in any organization is going to start moving in and encroaching and even taking over on certain functions within organizations. So I think you're going to see that people are going to have to adapt very quickly to keep roles and keep themselves current.
Yeah. So we have about 4 minutes left before we start wrapping up, and there's we're seeing a number of questions. So I'm going to remind folks that for those questions that we didn't get to ask, we're going to follow up, make sure that we can address them accordingly. There's one last question that I'd like for the panelists to provide some perspective, and that is, and I probably might want to start with you, Paul. What do you think is lacking in the new life sciences era? This is going to put you on the spot. What do you think it's lacking in the new life sciences era? And I would add to that, what do you think are the top trends to watch in the next 3 to 5 years?
Interesting. Yeah, that's a tough one. That's a tough one for me. I mean, my mind always going, and I'm going to be provoking Vincent a little, but my mind always goes to people centricity. Because no matter, I cannot see a day that people are not the most valuable asset, even in a digital world, and you can't separate the two. So for me, I think today, and it's only going to get, I think it's going to go counter to the intuitive thought that digital is going to replace that need. I think it's actually going to further emphasize the need for people, but people centricity in a different way of investing them so they can discover, capitalize, and really work off of the capabilities of these technologies.
Vincent, what's your response to that?
My response or the answer to the question?
What was that?
My response or my answer to the question are both?
Both?
Yeah, I think I agree with Paul. No, fundamentally, but people will still be needed. I think the level of upskilling, the level that people change, particularly, for example, in operations type functions, are going to need to accelerate at a pace that I don't think a lot of people can. I think what I think is a trend, I think if I mentioned earlier on about the tech companies moving into the pharma space, I think that's going to continue. I think companies are going to struggle to attract the talent that they need, because talent is about attracting talent and retaining talent. And if I'm a digital analyst leaving college this year, am I going to work for a high-tech company like, Microsoft, Amazon, even Viva? Or will I take my career into a consulting company such as KPMG or Deloitte, or even a niche company such as Pariveda, which is working on a lot of cool projects and you have access to Bruce, the CEO, etc.? Or do I take a risk and go to pharma and maybe sit working on a legacy system for 5 years and become stale and see my classmates overtake me? So I think pharma is going to struggle in the next few years to attract talent. They're going to have to outsource functions that they typically didn't do in the past.
Well said. Nandan, Gavin, anything to add?
Yeah, I think in the new era of life sciences, I do feel attracting talent, retooling the talent, retaining the talent, I think is is definitely, that is, as an industry or maybe even within a sponsor, that's something to focus on. The digitization of just society in general and of the industry is a big wave coming in front of us, and I think that's something that's people need to, organizations need to step up to be ready for that.
Yeah,
Cool.
yeah, I would say, Stephanie, from my perspective, I think you're going to see more collaboration between insights and analytics and the commercial organization. And I'm not sure if it was Vincent or Paul that mentioned kind of willingness to change, but I think if you look at the old sales model of more reps covering more physician offices, that's not the model anymore, right? They're still a necessary tool in your commercial toolkit, but you really need to be looking at channel effectiveness, channel ROI, what your physicians are responding to, and the sales is just another vehicle of that. So it really needs to be tactical, almost distribution of your sales resources with a lot of insights and analytics behind it, right? Not just a top 10 deciling based on reach and frequency, but what's your access position, what's their preference for being reached, and things like that. So I think you're going to see the commercial go-to-market model evolving significantly in the next few years.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we have ran out of time, and there are definitely more questions to address than the time that we have left. So as I mentioned, we're going to be following up with those individuals that didn't get to have their questions answered. Before we close out, I'd like to first and foremost thank the panel for joining us and sharing their perspectives and insights. I'd like to leave you all with three main takeaways. The first one is the realization that it should not come to us as a surprise to us that those life sciences companies that have started their digital journey to reimagine their business before the pandemic will obviously be able to capitalize on those investments, and we will be better positioned to face and survive future disruptors and disruptions. Those that haven't, and those that are still struggling to catch up, this is my personal opinion, will be on their path to face extinction or some sort of extinction. So if they're unable to get their act together in the next 12 to 18 months. Second point, the recognition that acceleration can be possible across the end-to-end pharma value chain. But in order to deliver breakthroughs and tangible business outcomes at pace and at scale, this needs to be a C-suite priority, in my opinion, again, as it will result in companies having to transform multiple parts of their business and their organizations all at once rather than sequentially. And the third point and last point is the acceptance that what was considered groundbreaking yesterday, as you've heard from our panelists today, is table stakes today. So here's a few key reasons why. Demands from patient service and patient experience will continue to become greater than ever. R&D organizations have set the expectation already that we can, in fact, accelerate drug discovery, drug development, and launch. Supply chain and manufacturing will become less linear and less reliant on outdated infrastructure and spreadsheets, and become more of a dynamic and connected autonomous ecosystem where the patient, the customer, is put at the center of the ecosystem as opposed to have them at the end of the value chain. And last, one of the popular themes of this webinar today, courageous leadership, folks. The courageous leadership that will be required to effectively drive the reskilling of the workforce, making the space for what we like to call the rise of the digital enterprise solution architect. So with that all said, in the words of the president of Novartis, and I'm again paraphrasing, there is no going back, folks. We are going to digitize healthcare. So the question becomes for you all, are you in? Will your organization be able to be part of the pack that gets to shape the future of healthcare? Thank you so much today for joining us. Thank you, Vincent, Paul, Gavin, Nandan. It's been a pleasure hosting with you. And if you like or enjoy what you heard today, folks, and you'd like to hear more about our perspective on what it takes to reimagine the future of healthcare in a digital world, accelerate pace and adoption, we're here. Come talk to us. We would love to be part of your story. Thank you so much. Good afternoon.